1,500 children like me were groomed, abused, raped, trafficked, tortured, and some even murdered. I was crying, I was bleeding, I was trying to make sense, of what had just happened, because I didn't even know you could physically do that.
Biggest part of the problem you have these days is these young girls that are dressed up, i.e. miniskirts, stuff like that.
They found this 13-year-old girl. She was almost completely naked, she was blind drunk, and she was with 7 adult Pakistani men. And South Yorkshire Police arrested the 13-year-old girl for being drunk and disorderly.
Something terrifying is unfolding in the UK. There are gangs operating in the shadows, preying on the most vulnerable members of our society, children. Organized groups known as grooming gangs have unleashed a wave of terror, targeting innocent young lives. So who are these gangs, and how do they operate? The term grooming gangs first gained national attention with the shocking Rotherham scandal. Vulnerable girls, often from broken homes and troubled backgrounds, were manipulated, drugged and coerced into horrific acts. The abuse wasn't random. It was widespread and organized, targeting children who had nowhere else to turn. It was a calculated operation, not a collection of isolated incidents. Rotherham was just the beginning. What followed were similar cases in Rochdale and Telford, revealing an epidemic of child abuse that authorities failed to address. In Rochdale, a town near Manchester, 9 men were convicted in 2012 for grooming and sexually exploiting vulnerable girls. Many of the victims were teenagers, drawn in with promises of affection, gifts, and even food, only to be trapped into a cruel cycle of abuse. Meanwhile, Telford stands as a grim reminder of how widespread this issue is. The scale of the abuse in Telford was staggering, yet, just like in Rotherham and Rochdale, authorities were aware but did nothing to act decisively. But what's even more chilling is the systemic failure to protect these children. Warnings were ignored. In Rotherham, a fear of being labelled racist paralyzed action, particularly when the perpetrators were predominantly Pakistani men. In Rotherham, a fear of being labelled racist paralyzed action, particularly when the perpetrators were predominantly Pakistani origin men. This reluctance to confront the issue allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. The victims were not protected. Instead, they were dismissed, blamed, and left to suffer in silence. Research into grooming gangs show that they come from diverse backgrounds. While some high-profile cases have involved British Pakistani men, a Home Office review concluded that the ethnicity of offenders varies widely and reflects the general population. The review cautioned against focusing solely on one group, as it could undermine efforts to effectively combat child sexual exploitation. The issue of grooming gangs is far more complex than it may seem. It involves a web of social, cultural, and systemic factors, which means there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Certain patterns have emerged from high-profile cases, but addressing these issues requires comprehensive strategies that don't stigmatize any particular community. The challenge, as the national conversation in the UK continues, is to find a way to tackle child sexual exploitation while being sensitive to cultural dynamics. The urgency is clear. The protection of vulnerable children cannot and should not be compromised. Bureau Report, India Today, Global.